Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Undercooled. Today I'm here with Tim and we're going to do a little wrap up of how it went last term. Tim's going to tell us about how his brand new math course went. I'm going to tell you how my grading for growth experiment went. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how ChatGPT might have had an impact on our courses this term. So, Tim, how did that math course go?
Oh man, it was a lot of work. I am glad I did it. I'm also glad it's over. The students have been giving really positive feedback though. They've been already telling me how they're using the math in their other MSc classes, which is perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. So the students taking mechanics are using the tensor stuff in their, stress and strain solid mechanics content. The students who are doing physics of materials have been using the eigenvalue analysis. Everyone's got to solve differential equations. So far, the students are really saying that, yeah, this course is hard. It's a lot of work. I'm saying, yes, this course is hard. It's a lot of work, but they really are learning content that is directly useful in their other courses. So after a first draft, I think we're in pretty good shape to say that this is, in fact, a good idea.
Oh, fantastic. I know that I've talked to a few students who were in your class who came through advising, and they were telling me it's so much better than a regular math course. Because they say in math courses, they never quite know why they're learning anything. But in
That's
your
right.
course, they understand exactly why they're learning everything. And that's
Yep.
really cool.
Every single video for the class, there's always a slide that says why it matters. And if I can't make that slide, I know I need to change the lesson. But it's always here's a problem in material science where this math content is applicable.
So how did you actually set up the class? You mentioned videos. You have class. What does the structure of your class look like?
Yep. It's a flipped format. The content delivery mechanism is video recordings. They're generally about 20 minutes in length, some a little longer, some a little shorter. And so students watch these 20-minute videos before class. That's where I introduce the basic ideas. And then after or before every class session, the students on Canvas have to submit to me a summary of what they learned from the video, and then also at least one question that they want me to answer in class. So then when we come to class, first thing I do is answer their questions. And sometimes that leads to some discussion. Sometimes they want an example problem, and so I work out another example on the board. Then in these 90-minute classes, that first half hour is me answering questions. The last hour is working on the homework. So it's a pretty straightforward flipped format implementation. And several of the students did say, I've taken other flipped classes that were terrible, but this one was actually okay. So we'll accept that as glowing praise.
Yeah. And what about, now that you've taught the course, you can probably finally put up a list of topics that you taught. Maybe we can put that up on top of what we're talking about, but could you describe what you actually covered in the class?
Sure. There were four main topic areas that we went through. The first was really just a review of fundamental math that everyone needs to be very fluent in. So even simple things like properties of exponentials or how to expand a function in a Taylor series, really true review of the calculus sequence. The second topic was the linear algebra fundamentals. So doing linear transformations, transformations of vector spaces, eigenvalues and eigenvectors. And then the third topic, differential equations. We did ordinary differential equations by matrix methods in particular. And so really making that connection between linear algebra, linear differential equations. We also did partial differential equations a little bit analytically, but mostly numerically. And this is already one area that I know I want to do more and better next year, is doing more with numerical methods for math in engineering. Because the reality is being able to do math by hand is very useful for understanding what you're doing, but you're not going to walk into a jet engine factory and start calculating the hydrodynamics of the engine by hand. You're going to be doing that with computer models, and I want students to get some proficiency in that area. And then the fourth area was complex analysis, particularly focused on Fourier series, Fourier transforms, and being able to use these ideas to connect to what is reciprocal space, how does diffraction work, and looking at interactions between lattices and waves. So we did look at orthogonality of functions. How do you take an inner product and go from the idea of an inner product in a discrete finite dimensional space to an infinite dimensional continuous space? So we did that. Some minds were blown. And that was also a nice opportunity to say, hey, this thing that you did in MSE 242, where you multiplied the wave function by its complex conjugate and then integrated it for some reason, this is what you were actually doing. You were really taking, the inner product of the wave function with itself to find its norm, blah, blah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then what do you think you're going to do differently next year? I mean, hopefully you're going to have a lot more students next year, and that scaling issue is probably weighing heavily on you as we speak.
Yeah, scaling is certainly a question. That is a problem for future Tim, and we're just going to set that aside for now. The question of what to do differently, what to do better, one area for sure is, as I said, doing more with numerical methods. I have a much better sense now of what students are already able to do and what they're going to struggle with. So I think I can target that instruction a lot more effectively now. The other aspect where I would like to change the direction of the course a little bit is actually on the pacing, spending more time in Fourier series, Fourier transforms, complex analysis, doing more in reciprocal space, because it's a topic that's can be very challenging to get any physical intuition for. And that's something that I think will serve the students really well in structures and also in their experimental work. Everyone does XRD. You have to be able to really describe what's happening physically in the interaction between waves and a crystal structure. And if our students can get to a place where they're more comfortable thinking in frequency space, then I think they'll be better equipped to do that.
That's great. And, I'm hopeful that very soon we can make this a requirement of all of our students and then drop our math requirement, because we have this extra fifth math course that they all took at the end of their career, not when we were hoping they would take it.
Right.
So hopefully this will be a course they take alongside, as sophomores, freshmen or sophomores, depending on their level, so they can, really use it to improve the whole curriculum. So do you think that, I imagine you're going to want to run it through one more time with more students to feel comfortable about doing it, because when we do it for the whole class, we're talking like pushing the enrollment up to at least 40, maybe 50. There's no reason why we can't restrict it to only MSE majors at first. But I have a feeling that people are going to want to take your course from other departments, and it could really grow. So those are challenging things, again, for future Tim to think about. But I think from our own department's perspective, I think I'm convinced that we have to do this, and it has to be a requirement for all of our students, because it's going to make a much better graduate of our program if they've gone through this.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It's not quite ready to be a required core course yet. It needs one more pass on the iteration. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I think will really justify it being a required class is making the connections with our other courses even more explicit and intentional. Right. I know that Wenhao and Ashwin are doing a lot with the kinetics course to implement more with numerical methods in that class. And I've been talking to them about how we can make some additional linkages between the math course and with kinetics, which is typically the most mathematically challenging class for our majors. Right. So I think after we can get that dialed in, then we'll be ready to just give it a spot in the curriculum and hit go.
And I also think ultimately it should be a required course for some of our computational material science courses. So the course that Katsuyo Thornton created would probably really value a lot of the computational skills that you're teaching your students while they're in your course. So, I think this could be a linchpin for success for our students. But I'm hoping it goes as you teach it again with maybe double the number of students or something next year. Then we would have run it 2 times. We can make it we can actually make it a permanent number right away if we tell the college that this is going to be a required course. But there's no rush. We'll certainly be able to get a permanent number for it. And I'm hoping that in 2 times it becomes the required course. And I also think we need to find other faculty who can also teach it. This probably shouldn't be just you, because we should probably offer it both terms since it's a required course.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that the flipped format is an advantage for, is the content is already there. The videos are made, the homeworks are written, the quizzes are written. So it's a pretty turnkey course to teach. You just have to be willing to show up and answer questions. Now, another topic you raised earlier, the generative AI question, it's very, it's such a double-edged sword in this class, because as a tool for writing code, for helping with numerical projects, and even just for doing research, for figuring out how to ask a question, like what are methods that you can use to solve partial differential equations? It's a really good tool to be able to use. But of course, like with every other tool, people will misuse it. And I'm still not quite sure in the course design how much I want to try to sort of engineer the learning experience to enforce boundaries on AI usage. When should it be required? When should it be forbidden? What is the gray area in the middle? Because teaching students to use these tools effectively and appropriately is really important. I completely believe that's something that we have to do as faculty. And so thinking about how to structure the assignments so that when it is the right tool to use, students will want to use it. And when it's not the right tool to use, that students will not want to use it because it will be less efficient than other tools. That, I think, is the design challenge for next year, is structuring those assignments so that it makes sense when to use AI and when not to.
Right. Right. And of course, the real challenge is if students decide to use it to cheat. And that's not a efficient or useful thing for them, of course. It's almost impossible to detect, yet we all know when we say it. We just can't prove it. And well, I'll talk a little bit about that with my particular course because I have some unique issues. But I think it's true for almost any faculty member. And the flip format gives you an opportunity to interact with the students live so that you can actually question them, in a way giving mini oral, collecting oral data. Let's put it that way. I don't want to call it an exam. And so it's very easy to figure out whether they understand something or not, because if you ask them a question, you'll hear how they respond.
That's right.
And ultimately, that's the best defense against using it as cheating, is if you can find a way to scalably assess their learning with a discussion.
Yep.
And I don't think any of us know how to do that right now.
Yeah, that is a challenging problem that is going to be an important one. With with math in particular, as we do still have students doing some problems by hand, that sort of live, in-person, on-paper assessment is still pretty resilient to AI interference, we'll say. With projects, though, because I did give 2 numerical modeling projects in the course as well, I plan to do a 3rd one next time. It's almost hard to define what is even cheating, because at the end of the day, code has been produced, it gives outputs. Students have to interpret the output. It's not just, okay, here's my plot. It's, is this plot reasonable? What does it mean?
Sure.
How is it useful in describing the physical world? And there is at least still this year, there's a level of quality in those interpretive responses that I find GPT is really not capable of achieving yet, especially when it's, here is a plot, describe the physical meaning of the different curves. That's something that it very quickly becomes apparent if the students don't have an understanding of the output of their own code.
Yeah. It's going to be an important tool that we just have to learn how to use. I guess I chafe when I hear people say, "Oh, it's like when we got calculators, we thought the world was going to end and all this stuff." But, I was in college when we got calculators. It was not like that. It was nothing like ChatGPT. It just meant we didn't have to use our slide rules. And it gave us an answer a little bit more quickly. But that's all it did. It just did a routine calculation. There was no intellectual contribution that the calculator made, unlike ChatGPT that actually is doing intellectual work by copying legions of other people who put stuff on the web a long time ago. It's a very different thing. It also was trivial to use a calculator. It is not trivial to use ChatGPT because of all the vetting you really have to do to make sure it's accurate. And honestly, I think one way to give exams without worrying about ChatGPT would be to ban all electronic devices in the room and hand out slide rules. Because I think it's a good mathematical thing to teach students. It's trivial to learn how to use a slide rule.
I'll have to spend another day on properties of logarithms.
Yeah. And I see a need for slide rules because you can't use ChatGPT. But once you these calculators these days are even so powerful, that you could put all sorts of crib notes in them and everything. So just saying you can use calculators doesn't really solve the problem for a determined person. But, of course, how do you stop the student who's going to stash their device in the in a bathroom and ask for a bathroom break and go get their device and figure out how to do something?
If someone wants to cheat bad enough, they're going to find a way. It's not our job to prevent every possible option because that's simply not realistic. It's our job to create sufficient barriers that any honest person will be disincentivized from being dishonest.
Remove temptations. And electronic devices are temptations.
So. Oh, absolutely. It's funny you say that because I am giving a final exam for the course. It'll be next week. And the final exam is pencil and paper. Mm-hmm. You may bring any handwritten paper notes you want. You can bring a whole notebook if you feel like it. You can bring nothing. That's up to you, the student. But you will be given some questions on paper and you will have pencils and you can bring paper notes. And there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth in class when I announced this. And so I took 10 minutes to explain, here's what happens cognitively when you sit down and write. There is actual learning value to this process. It's not about being a rules enforcer. It's like, it helps to prevent cheating. And I'm not going to pretend that's not part of the motivation. But part of the motivation is just sitting down and actually taking the time to be quiet and focus and to write things out on paper is very transformative intellectually. And that's something that our students owe it to themselves to spend a little more time doing for their own benefit. So eat your vegetables.
Yep. And I'll talk about some of that in Michael. So you're telling them they're not allowed to bring electronic devices?
I'm not going to be sitting around checking students' pockets for cell phones. That is weird, to say the least. But no electronics may be used on the exam.
Okay. And you're having them do the honor code and
yes,
you'll sit outside. So other students are on notice that they are, ethically bound to report students who do pull out their electronic devices. And you don't even have to say that. It's just supposed to be part of the honor code.
Right.
So, well, cool.
Yeah.
Anything else about your course you'd like to mention?
I don't think so. Now that we're talking about assessment a little bit, I know you've been doing a lot with grading methods in your course and how you want to assess students in multiple different ways. So maybe let's get into that. How has your
Okay.
experience with alternative grading methods been working out this semester?
It was rough. It was rough. It's brand new to me. So I made many mistakes. I think I recovered from lots of them. I know much better how to, much more, I know how to do this better, I think, next time. I still think it worked out, though, in the end. And I'm actually happy to say that I feel I have more than just anecdotal evidence. I didn't do a study or anything, but the learning gains in this class were probably higher than in the last 15 years.
That's
So I
excellent.
think it's finally helping students learn more. And that's the whole point of this. So just as a recap, I'm teaching a introductory material science course based on Bill Callister's book. It's our 4-credit intro course that traditionally was taught with 3 50-minute lectures a week by a professor. And then there was a 50-minute recitation session with a graduate student. In the traditional course, the students come to class, do lecture, they get homework every week, and in the recitation section, the GSI, the graduate student instructor, usually gives quizzes every single week. There are typically 2 midterms and a final, and so your grade is a weighted average of the homeworks, quizzes, midterms, and final. And that's a pretty traditional format for most courses for the last 2,000 years. And a long time ago, I had learned about active learning from our Center for Research on Learning and Teaching. And I started putting more active learning into the classroom and doing little experiments. And it was pretty interesting. I had, would have one session that was flipped and the others were traditional. But then I ran into my friend Eric Mazur at a Materials Research Society meeting. And he told me to blow off the conference and come visit him and look at his class. So I, got on the subway because it was in Boston. So I went over to Harvard, and watching that class totally changed my life and the way I teach, because he had completely stopped lecturing. And I had known, I've known Eric for a long time because my research area is ultrafast laser interaction with materials like Eric. And I also knew about his teaching work with peer instruction. And I had even tried, devices in the classroom, wired TI-83 calculators with, a whole system to do audience response for doing, active learning. And that was great, but it took way too much time, and I kind of abandoned it because it just really got in the way of the whole class. And it took me another 15 years until I ran into Eric again. When I realized that I got it wrong, it was not that the clickers got in the way of the class, it's that the class gets in the way of the clicker. And so once I gave up the idea of lecturing at all, it just changed everything. And so I started using nb.mit.edu, which was the precursor to what's now Perusal. I started doing homework activities in class as a team-based effort. The students would always sit in teams. And so it was a team-based, project-based approach to teaching. I got rid of the recitation because all of my classes ended up being like recitation. So I just did 4 hours of instruction instead of 3, and farming it off to a GSI and instead engaged the GSI to help me do all of this team-based learning. I eliminated exams because I had read the literature that they're not really a great way to measure learning, and instead used a format called readiness assurance activities to give a machine gradable test to the individuals, followed right away. The immediacy is important by the exact same quiz, but then the team would do it. And in the team round, it was open book, open notes, open internet, and I had an army of instructional staff help students. So that's what I had been doing for a while, and there were a lot of problems with all of that. It was way too easy for students to just do everything I asked them to do, and they found shortcuts and ways to game the system, so they never learned anything. And I was very frustrated, and then I had heard about what a professor at Grand Valley State, Robert Talbert, was doing with alternative grading schemes, especially, the ungrading movement was around. Specifications grading was a big thing. And those were things that really attracted me to trying to rethink about how I did assessment. A year ago, almost 2 years ago now, Robert came to Michigan and did a little teaching circle, and I got to interact with him on Zoom, of course. And it was just fascinating what he talked about. And his book finally came out that he wrote with one of his colleagues, forgot his name, Clark. Anyway, they wrote this book called Grading for Growth. They changed the name of it from mastery grading to grading for growth because mastery grading has all sorts of, social implications, and just the same reason why real estate agents don't call it the master bedroom anymore. They call it the primary bedroom. And so, we don't master our standards, we achieve them, and it's a better word. So I read this book last February, and it was amazing. And a lot of the elements that I was doing in my class are actually embedded in Grading for Growth. And there are 4 pillars to Grading for Growth. One is that you have to have clear standards. These are not the micro standards that we write down when we write the outcomes of every single class session. We started doing that a long time ago because we realized we were forcing our students to drink from a fire hose by pounding 12 brand new concepts into them in 50 minutes. That's too much. So instead, standards are sort of at the module level, or the not at the macro level, not the course outcomes, but not the session ones, but something in between, a small enough set that you can point to these standards. So I have broken my course up into 14 modules for the 14 weeks of the class. And so I had standards for each one, but only 2 standards in general. One was a conceptual standard, and the other was a problem-solving standard, because in most engineering courses, those are the 2 kinds of things that you partition, and they're very different. And yes, you have to understand the conceptual before you can do the problem-solving, but the problem-solving, presents very different challenges to a student than the concepts do, and they're not the same at all. And they're equally difficult for students to grasp. Mm-hmm. So I had one of those for each ones. And so I had not done that, so I did that to get ready. The next pillar of Grading for Growth is that you have to have feedback loops everywhere. How is a student going to learn unless they get feedback on their work? And so when I looked at all the different activities that I was doing and using for assessment, I had to think very intentionally about what were these feedback loops. Some of the activities already had feedback loops. So of course, in my class, the first introduction to the material is not a lecture. Instead, I use reading, and I use perusal, which is a way that students can read the book. They're required to annotate parts of the book. That'll become, their annotations become visible to the rest of the class, and students can annotate those annotations. And the hope is that you generate a discussion about the book before they ever come into class. They don't need a lecture. They can do that. If they want a lecture, yeah, I have all my recorded lectures from the COVID days, and they're welcome to use that. Those are optional if that's how they prefer to learn. But they still have to go and read the book and do these annotations. So they're getting feedback through that from their classmates, and that's a lot of feedback. When they do the homework, they do the homework on their own. They're only graded for their effort. In fact, I tell students if they make a closed form, compact solution for the homework set, like they've been taught to do their whole lives, I tell them they're going to get a 0 because I want to see their messy work. I want to see that they struggled and tried again. So I'm going to give them a 0 if they make it look perfectly neat and perfect. I want to see their mess.
I love that because I deal with the same problem in the lab course when students are trying to keep a lab notebook and they're trying to submit reports as their lab notebook. No, it's a lab notebook. It's a journal. Show me the struggle. Show me the mess. Show me the blind alleys and the wrong turns. Like, if you're not doing those, you're probably not engaging with the projects the way I want you to. So, yeah, I very much understand that struggle.
But then they come to class and they have a homework activity in class with whiteboards, with my instructional aides, helping them where they make a better homework solution set. Then my set comes out, and then they have to take their original document and they have to mark it up. They grade it themselves, whether it's a math or algorithmic error, they circle in blue and correct it. If it's a conceptual error, they circle it in red, and then they write a paragraph about how they overcame the barriers to understanding that. And then they let me know if they still understand it or not, and I grade that for honesty. So that's a lot of feedback in that process. And there's also, in both of those cases, the next pillar, which is reassessment without penalty. We learn by making mistakes. So I don't want to penalize students because they make mistakes. I want them to make mistakes because I want them to learn. So in the case of perusal, they can keep making annotations until they get a really high score, right? There's no, as long as they do it within the time frame, unlimited attempts. With the homework, how can, it's only graded for effort and honesty. So they can make lots of mistakes as long as their reflection, they've corrected everything and understand it. And the same goes with our reflections. So again, I'm haunted by, Father Guido Sarducci's 5-Minute University, where too much of education is focused on the immediacy of what did they know on this day when they took a test. And everyone forgets that's not what's important. What's important is retention. Right? Retention and the ability to use what they learn in this class in their future life. And so, looking at, the literature, there's a lot that can be done. What's wrong with cramming for an exam is that nothing goes into long-term memory. Learn it, forget it, and it's a waste of time. So in my class, I try to stretch everything out to 3 weeks, and at the very end, I make them revisit it. I have them do a standards reflection, where they look at the standards for each module, and they show me evidence from their work that they achieved those standards. They all get 100 on it. I just want them to do it. The whole purpose of that exercise is to make them revisit their work and reflect on it, hoping that that will drive that into their long-term memory. So again, they're using themselves as the feedback loop, right? And they're all going to get credit for it, so they're not going to fail when they do it. And then the one thing I hadn't been doing that I built in was in the RAAs, the reassurance activities. Last year, I made it way too student-centric. I made it that they had to get 15% on their individual effort and 85% on the team effort, and then I would weight that score. There was no individual accountability. Nobody learned anything. So this year I made it 50-50 averaging, but I imposed a few other things. The team round, it's open book, open notes, open internet, and we give them hints. So if the team can't get 100%, there's something drastically wrong. Especially since these RAAs are questions very similar to all the things we do in class where we do practice. So I told them if your team doesn't get 100%, no one will pass this exercise. And then if you don't get and you needed a 84 average to pass this event, which meant they had to get at least a 66% on their individual. And so I allowed them, if they didn't get a 66% on the individual round, they were allowed to come for one retake where I made a new quiz, but they had to come to my office hours to take it. And the idea of that is that it gives me a chance to give an oral exam to the bottom part of the distribution. So I'm limiting my effort so that I can handle a large class and work with the students who need my help the most, not the grade grubbers who are trying for, they were unhappy they only got a 90 instead of a 93. I don't need to talk to those students, but I do need to talk to the students who really struggled. And this goes into the next pillar, which is marks that really assess the growth of a student, meaningful marks in the assessment. And this is where it really challenged everything I had ever been doing. And it kind of challenges the way our whole community does grading. And it's embedded in all of these learning management systems like Canvas or Blackboard. And it's really kind of evil. We all give different kinds of assessments, and then we use a weighted average. And we feel that's okay because everything is measured in percent, which doesn't have units. But percent does have units. They're embedded units because you need to say percent of what. If you don't say percent of what, it's a meaningless number. And the grade you get on a reading assignment is very different than the grade you get on a quiz, which is very different than the grade you get on a project. So how can you mix your units and do it like that? And in material science, we should know better because what's one of the hardest things students struggle with when they first learn about phase diagrams? They confuse composition with fraction of phases. Why? Because they're both measured in percent. And they're really different things. It would be totally meaningless to take an average of those things. They have nothing to do with each other. And that's what's wrong with grading, the way we're normally grading. So to solve that, they suggest using something called a grading table. And I'm going to show the grading table on top of what we're talking about right now if you want to watch the video version. But I make a column for each type of assessment. Then I look at that assessment and I say, the only thing I care about, again, you don't want to use 0 to 100 because that compresses to 70 and then we don't have any accuracy. So it's much better to go back to the way we were all graded in elementary school of, did you achieve the outcomes? Were the standards? Are you approaching achieving them or you didn't? Very simple scheme, 0, 1, or 2. And I made it even simpler. Here's the pass, no pass line. So for the reading assignments, you had to get 100% to pass the reading assignment. But that shouldn't be hard because you can make annotations as many times as you want until you get it.
Right.
The homework, you had to get 100%. You had to do everything we asked you to do and convince us that you made effort and that you were honest, which is not that hard to do. For the quizzes, the team had to get 100%. The individual had to get at least a 66.666% to pass. And then you just got an S, satisfactory. And then in each column, I asked, what percentage of satisfactory scores during the course of the year convinces me that you've passed with the bare minimum requirement to go take another course? That's a C minus in our College of Engineering. And so I thought, probably that's like a 60%, no, 70% for like the reading, for all these things. So it's a threshold level. So if you go along the rows, you set the row for the lowest passable values. For the quizzes, it's a little harder. So I only made it, to get I did the C minus level, the B minus level, and the A minus level. The A minus level ended up being just 80% of the readiness assurance activities, 90% for just about all the others. And then I had one additional column for required components. So I make them do CAPME surveys for peer evaluation. If they don't do even one of those things, they can drop a whole letter grade. Because I'm sorry, those are easy things to do, and it's a required part of the course. I give them lots of opportunities to do it, but those are just mechanics of the course. And then I have thresholds. So it's like a game. If you play Candy Crush or something, if you want to move to the next level, you absolutely have to do all the things you need to do to go to the next level. And so your grade for the class will be the lowest level of any of those columns, because that's what you achieved. I should have stopped there. That was my first big mistake. I started thinking, well, what about, a C or a C plus? How am I going to do these incremental grades? And I came up with this crazy scheme of upping them. I think I have a good scheme now, but when I first wrote it and talked to the students about it, what I wrote actually made no sense. Nobody challenged me on it, but I challenged myself when I started to try to use it, because I didn't expect students to get the grades they were getting, and I never thought about that. So I was going from the top going down, like if you drop one grade, you'll lose an increment in one thing. If there's two, that's 2 increments. And that's all I said. But then I realized that somebody could fail one unit and still get a B plus in the course. And that's not at all what was intended. So I revised it and I said, look, in a game, the lowest level, that's it. And so if one column is the lowest, that's where we start. If you have one of those things and you have others that are much higher, I'll allow you to have one increment, an increment being a partial score. So a C minus to a C, or a C to a C plus. And then I put a strict limit. You can only get 3 increments in this scheme of raising your grade, because that's a whole letter grade. That's a pretty big gift. And so if a student has a D in, a D minus in one thing and 100 in all the others, they can go from a D, they can go 3 increments to a C minus and still pass the course, which I think is fair. And that took a long time to actually figure out. Luckily, the vast majority of the students finished the course at the A minus level. And there's the next big problem I had. The next big problem I had was in the last few years, 85% of the class was getting an A, and only 10% of the class knew anything. This is a problem. And so this year, before I even had them register, I wrote a note on the registration page saying this year's going to be different in order to, and this is something I learned from the book, Grading for Growth. I haven't given an exam for 15 years, but I'm giving a final this year. They made the point that a final exam is something that you do at the end of the course, after the course is over. All the learning is done. So it's okay to have something that's a summative evaluation, because you're not trying to teach them anything at this point. Right. The RAAs, it's all a learning experience. It's wonderful. So the final could be a, recertification of your learning. And as soon as they said it to me like that, I thought, what a great idea. So I made a final. The final is optional. Students don't have to take it. I don't mind giving everyone who doesn't know anything a B plus in the course as long as they do everything I told them to do. That's okay. But I'm not giving them an A if they don't know something. So to be able to get an A in the course, you have to first get to the A minus level for everything in the course. Then you have the opportunity to prove that you know the material by taking a 2-hour traditional handwritten final with a big mix of problems, which I'll give them partial credit for in the traditional way of doing it. And they need to get a 90 on the final to get an A minus and a 93 to get an A. And the problems are not that hard. They're all the problems that we did through the entire class, so that if they actually learned and did everything I told me honestly, they should have no problem scoring a 90% or a 93 on the final. And then to allow students who say earned a C plus, anyone who wants to take the final can increase their grade one additional increment, so the C plus to a B minus, if they get a B minus on the final. Well, I thought that was pretty fair. The first day of class, it was amazing. 15 people walked out of class.
Wow.
Because there's a thing at Michigan called what, Atlas, is that it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And Atlas does something that I think is pedagogically really bad. They publish, without the consent of instructors, they publish the grade distribution of every class historically. And so students choose their classes based on grade distributions because they just want to pay their money and get an A. And I wrote in my thing, don't look at this, the numbers, the distribution will change dramatically in my class. But nobody ever reads any of the stuff that I write. So they came to class and they were like shocked. And I said, look, this is like not that drastic of an idea. In a traditional class, if you don't get an A on the final, they're almost always weighted much more heavily. If you don't get an A in the final, you're not going to get an A in the class, right? And this one kid stands up and starts shouting expletives at me right in the middle of the class, saying that that's not true. And I'm like, excuse me? And he starts yelling at me, saying that he has to take this course to graduate, and what am I doing to him? I'm ruining his career. And I'm like, you don't need to take this course to graduate. I said, I happen to know what department you're in. I know the requirements. This is one of 6 areas and one of 5 courses in each of those 6 areas that you have to make some distribution choices from. So you're welcome to take any of our other sections or any of the other courses in your section. Your department's not forcing you to take this. But of course, what he meant was, I chose the one that's going to help my GPA the best, and you just messed this all up for me. Luckily, he dropped the course.
Good.
But boy, that was ugly. And it set a really bad tone for the whole rest of the course, and I've been fighting uphill ever since.
Yeah.
So it's been rough. It's been really rough. But the good news is, when I allowed students to do the retakes on the RAAs, the vast majority performed not just a little bit better, but a lot better. Students who got like a 50 on it initially got 100 on the retake.
Wow.
I had
that's
never
huge.
seen that. I've always given some kind of retakes, and usually it didn't help students at all to retake it. But because of the way it was all structured and what they wanted to get to that A minus level, so they had to get 80% of them satisfactory, it motivated, and they've even told me they studied really hard to do the retake. And so I view that as a major success, that they actually learned more of the material. And so that made me happy. And I'm hoping they study really hard for the final. But the ChatGPT stuff, it kind of destroyed perusal for me this year.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, they ended up, and they must talk to each other. I'm sure there's, Reddits on this. They figured out how to cut and paste into the text boxes, even though the software forbids it. But I talked to the developer of the software, and he told me, if a student's motivated, they can go to developer mode in the web browser and write some code and change it. Well, I know they did this because perusal flags duplicates. And there's no way someone's going to put in a duplicate unless they're cutting and pasting.
Right.
When I read through these, I found one student read the 900-page book in 2 days and made the annotations for the entire term. And when I looked at it, because it tags when a student, puts in their comment, they have to make at least 7 comments distributed across the whole section to get credit. They were putting in something like 600 words of text in 10 minutes. Total.
That's pretty good.
From beginning to end. Well, I don't know about you, but I have not typed at 60 words a minute since I took typing classes in my high school on an electric typewriter, copying from. And even when I was typing at higher than 60 words a minute, my mistake rate starts to climb. Well, this was beautiful prose. And the other thing they figured out how to do is they just wrote definitions, which are really easy to grab from somewhere else. And even if they didn't figure out how to do the cut and paste, they would find these definitions and then type them in by hand. Can I prove that? No. But I can prove if they did 60 minutes, 60 words a minute, there is clearly academic dishonesty going on because nobody can read and comprehend and put that much in in that time. So, it doesn't matter how they did it. It was clearly dishonest. And this is a big problem. So they weren't learning it from the text. They completely subverted the meaning of that. I know they were also using things for the homework, so they weren't learning that. But hopefully by going through the activity in class, I covered some of that. So sadly, a lot of people didn't learn a lot in the class, but they probably won't get A's in the class either. It's, right now, 75% of the students are at the A- level. And that's
still
good.
huge.
I'm glad. Yeah, it's huge. But I doubt that 75% are going to get the final. And boy, I have a lot of finals that I wrote in the, I've been teaching this course since 1996. And I had a final every year, and they're all different. So we'll see. It shouldn't be a surprise because where do you think I get all of my in-class activity problems from? They're from my old finals. So the students have seen a lot of these problems, but it probably won't matter because, they still have to understand it. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to give my students the first final I've given in 15 years, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, it sounds like, at least for the students who really need the help and who really need to make the improvements, it sounds like the mechanisms are really there and actually working because, in so many traditionally taught classes, there are no gap closers. If you're on the bottom of the distribution, you're just on the bottom of the distribution. And mathematically, yes, the distribution has a bottom. We can't fix that. We can't make the class a delta function, but you can still say, okay, the people who are struggling, how can I help them the most? And it seems like that at least is getting accomplished, which is great.
Yeah. And, I didn't talk a lot about my instructional aids and all this, but all that other stuff worked. I should also mention, because I was doing this retake, our chair was very kind to me, and I had a smaller section. There were only 30 students in the class. So, whether or not this scales, I don't know. But, I'm starting to realize scaling's just a bad idea because scaling usually ruins things. which is why I'm hoping your math course is taught both terms so that it doesn't have to scale that big. Because I think there's real value in small classes. And, I certainly wasn't the first to come to that conclusion. That's well known. And so scaling it is not always the best idea. Actually, it's always a bad idea.
So what are you planning to, well, before we go, what do you want to do differently next year with the grading?
I think next year I'm going to get rid of the incremental scoring or make it very, very clear that, that I'm going from the lowest one up. If you have 3 low grades, right, each grade, each column requires an up, right? So if you have 3 grades at the lowest level, the highest grade you're going to get is 1 increment because it took 3 increments to get those 3 up 1 level.
Right.
And I'm not going to round up, I round down. So if there's 2 that need to go up, you only have 3, so that's only 1 up.
Right. Okay.
And I think if I did that, that'll make it better. I am going to talk to the people at Perusal to see if there's a way to block definitions as counting. There's no value in a student writing a definition for a word that's already defined in the book. They need to reflect on what they're saying and synthesize. And I don't know. I find ways to enforce the requirement. They show me their messy work, just like you're doing with the lab modules. I think, not sure exactly how to deal with ChatGPT. I think it's really damaging my class. I participated, we have Amazy in my class, which is, in our university, it's a curated data set with just my material, and I set a system prompt so students don't get the answer, they get a guided way to approach the information, and that's all good, but it doesn't quite work well. I've also tried Learning Clues, which is a commercial version of that, and these are very powerful tools, but I'm not sure that it's valuable for learning. It's I think it's kind of telling that the most hated company, for me, was this company called Chegg that
wow.
allowed students to cheat for a fee. Well, Chegg was valued at $99 billion a year ago. Now they're no value. They've been destroyed because ChatGPT does what they did better, and it's free. And I think that says a lot. So I think this is a major problem. If you read the Chronicle for Higher Education, you'll see every single day there are articles about students cheating with ChatGPT and how to deal with it. And the truth is nobody knows how to deal with it. You hear essays from students at Ivy League colleges saying, yeah, we cheat. Of course we cheat. We're all using ChatGPT. And they're really clever about how they use it because, they're really smart people. And our system pushes them into a corner and they don't feel they have anywhere else to go. So I think that ChatGPT it's going to force us to reevaluate how we teach. If we can do it in small classes and we can do oral exams, and if we can hand out analog devices like slide rules, I think that those will all have a positive benefit in really putting up more barriers to cheating. You won't ever stop it, but you can come close. And it's not just students who cheat. Everybody cheats in just about everything. Look at that New Jersey representative who showed everybody his Spotify playlist with all Bruce Springsteen, and then you find out that he faked it.
Yeah. All the doping scandals in athletes, this is just what people do.
Yes, and so we're really fighting uphill, and yet we have a real sacred responsibility to teach students how to use GPT, Gen AI, responsibly. And there's nothing wrong with using Gen AI if you give it credit. Nothing different about academia, where we're supposed to be referencing our ideas that we lifted from other people, because we've all lifted ideas. I mean, everything I'm doing in teaching is because, I met Eric Mazur, who taught me all of this stuff, and now Robert Talbert is teaching me all of this work with Grading for Growth. And, I am very grateful to them for making me aware of all these things. But I get to talk to you, Tim, about all of this, and I learn a lot from you and others who, spent much more time than I ever did actually studying education. But it's pretty challenging.
Yep.
But that's what we're here for. We're up for a challenge.
Well, I guess that's enough for today.
Yeah. So the good news is I think they learned a lot more than usual. And that's a big win. So I'm going to try to focus on that. And I'm really happy to hear that your students are learning a lot too. And I think you've really broken a structural problem we had in our program. And I think our students will perform much better when they take 335 or 330, whichever they're dealing with. And I think it'll translate to when they get out in the workplace.
Here's hoping.
Yep.
But yeah, as you said, at the end of the day, students are learning more. Then that, I think, is the thing we need to focus on the most.
That's right. All right. Well, with that, thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
All right.
See you later.
See you next time.